In this video here, I'm going to share with you 10 clothing brands and exactly what made them successful. What you're going to be exposed to in this video is how different clothing brands use their own unique set of resources in order to gain leverage to grow their clothing brand. What I'm hoping this video will do for you if you're starting up your own clothing brand is help you assess your own resources and the things that you have that you can leverage to gain the same level of success for your own clothing brand. Before we crack into this video, Apparel Success is sponsored by my buds over at Design Crowd, and if you struggle with designs, I really recommend that you try them out. You post a project on Design Crowd, sick designers from all over the world are going to compete for your project. You choose the winner, then you get that design plus revisions. I've literally sold thousands of these designs on my website, and I got them all made through Design Crowd. If you're interested, head over to designcrowd.com/apparel to learn about the special offer that I have for you, or just use the discount code APPAREL when you post a project on Design Crowd. All right, let's go over these 10 different clothing brands and specifically what made them successful. And each of these brands are in completely different niches. Some of them are lifestyle brands, some of them are streetwear brands, some of them are fashion brands, completely different. And I'm doing this on purpose so that no matter what type of clothing brand you're running, you're gonna be able to see how these different brands have become successful. All right, the first clothing brand on the list is Gymshark. If you've never heard of Gymshark, it's this absolutely massive fitness brand that was started by a guy named Ben Francis back in 2012. And 2012 is pretty recent. I mean, we're only going into 2024 here, and it takes time to build a legit brand. And this guy's brand, Gymshark, is now worth like $1.5 billion. Now, what's so impressive about Gymshark is that they're competing in a really saturated market. The fitness space in clothing already has tons of super established brands. And for a company to start up in 2012 to now be worth $1.5 billion, it's pretty impressive what he did. And the specific thing that Ben Francis, the guy who started this company, leveraged in order to get this success was influencer marketing. Basically, if you watched any fitness videos on YouTube after 2012, people working out, people teaching you how to get ripped, all that stuff, Gymshark was probably sponsoring that YouTuber. And what Gymshark realized was that everybody was going on YouTube to get their fitness advice, to get their motivation, to get their inspiration to go to the gym. It was just the place to go. And so they just decided to go all in on YouTube influencer marketing. And then he also did Instagram influencer marketing with all the fitness models and things like that. And it just absolutely was the right play, the right move to do, and the right risk to take. While other fitness brands were probably just trying to do the same old thing of trying to get into stores, get word of mouth to spread in their local area, Ben Francis of Gymshark was like, no, we're going to sponsor basically every single YouTuber who's doing fitness. We're going to put some serious dough into this, and we're just going to risk it that it's going to work out. And that was like the rare move that basically nobody else was willing to make. The second clothing brand is East Coast Lifestyle. If you've never heard of them, they're a Canadian clothing brand that started up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And they blew up to a multi-million-dollar clothing brand within the first year. Now, what's specifically interesting to me about the East Coast Lifestyle case study is that what the founder, Alex McLean, did back in 2013 when he started up the brand is he basically accidentally created a clothing brand that was for a blue ocean market. There's a great book called Blue Ocean Strategy by Chan Kim, where he talks about how you can either go into a market where everybody's competing and then you have to compete with everybody who's also within that niche, or you can look for the blue ocean opportunities. And the blue ocean opportunities are these massive markets that have been completely untapped because just nobody's really recognized that there was a need for a product there. So what was happening was the whole East Coast of Canada didn't really have a brand that was for them, that represented those people. And there's a pretty big population of people over there. And when he dropped East Coast Lifestyle, and it was from a kid who was born and raised in Nova Scotia, super authentic brand, it just absolutely started spreading, and people wanted to rep that they were from the East Coast and rock that around because they were super proud of it. So the leverage the East Coast Lifestyle used was leveraging the fact that they had a blue ocean market. They created a brand for a market that just hadn't really been tapped yet with a clothing brand that had a really strong appeal to the identity, and that's what made them work. The third clothing brand I want to talk about, just because it's really interesting and hits on some really important points here, is Drew House. Drew House was started up back in 2018 by Justin Bieber and his designer buddy. And what's really interesting about Drew House is obviously what makes them successful is the fact that Justin Bieber was one of the founders of it. So what I always talk about on this channel when it comes to building a successful clothing brand is that basically your clothing brand and your ability to get sales oftentimes is a representation of your own social status. A lot of people who come out with really, really big clothing brands, you'll notice that the founder was already somebody who was super successful or super high up within that particular niche. And so Drew House, OVO, all these clothing brands that are started up by these super famous people are perfect examples of how if you already have influence over an audience, it's super easy to monetize by literally just releasing your own clothing brand and coming out with your own merch line. The fourth clothing brand case study is Bylt Basics, BYLT Basics. Now, what they do is they make basic clothing, meaning regular t-shirts, regular long sleeve shirts, regular Henleys, really nice joggers, really nice jeans, just like the basic clothing that you wear. And there are tons of different companies doing this. A lot of different clothing brands, like Cuts Clothing is another one, that are basically just trying to make clothing purely based on the aesthetic, the shape of the clothing, and just the overall look and feel of the clothing. The thing that makes Bylt Basics super impressive and what they did to become successful is that they just simply outperformed a lot of the competition. Like if you go to ByltBasics.com, you'll notice that every single one of their products on their website has super professional photography, super professional video with a professional model who's modeling the clothing, walking around, showing it off. And all of their size charts are perfect. All of their descriptions are great. Their website's just like absolutely flawless. And then they also outperformed in terms of the advertising and their social media advertising. Bylt Basics essentially leveraged being more meticulous and more detail oriented than all of the other brands and putting in that extra effort. And they say that the last 5% of effort that you give determines your results with something, and Bylt Basics is a perfect example of that. The fifth clothing brand case study is Supreme. Supreme might be the single biggest streetwear brand on the planet. It started back up in the 90s in a small skateboard shop in New York City. Supreme leveraged something known as the yo-yo effect. The yo-yo effect is simply this phenomenon that occurs when the popular kids take on something, how it just starts to travel word of mouth. And the saying yo-yo effect came from back in school. If an unpopular kid showed up to school with a yo-yo, nobody else would want to do it. But when that one popular kid shows up with a yo-yo, then all the kids in the school the next day have a yo-yo, all of the neighboring schools have a yo-yo, and it just travels word of mouth. The specific way that Supreme leveraged this yo-yo effect is their skateboard shop in New York City became the place that all of the cool skateboard kids would go to hang out. And when you've got all the cool skateboard kids in the city going to your shop to hang out, buying your clothing brand Supreme, it just starts to travel word of mouth throughout all of the other kids. Then as they started gaining momentum, they simultaneously lowered the supply to increase the scarcity of the products. People couldn't get their hands on it, so they were willing to pay more, and that boosted the reselling market, and that's what drives the whole fuel for the whole clothing brand now. The sixth clothing brand is True Classic Tees. This case study is absolutely fascinating to me because all that their brand started out as was simply just t-shirts. And you can imagine just how competitive it is trying to sell t-shirts. And what their whole brand concept started out as was they noticed that most t-shirts for men weren't very flattering on like a regular body, on like a regular dad bod. And they'd be kind of like loose in the sleeves. They'd be kind of weird fitting on the stomach. So their whole goal was to make these t-shirts that kind of hugged your arms a little bit more because guys kind of like to have nicer arms and that didn't like show off your stomach as much. And so they just built a better quality t-shirt. And then the founder leveraged his own unique experience and expertise with online advertising to just blast TikTok ads, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, and that's what they did in order to become successful. The seventh clothing brand is Thursday Boots. Thursday Boots realized that there was this huge gap in the market for boots for men between making chunky boots that were like kind of just like unflattering and didn't have any aesthetic to them, and like extremely delicate fashion boots. And so they just wanted to find that middle ground where you're not having like these clunky boots, but they're also not like super fashion, and they're right in the middle where it's like this really cool masculine like rustic look of a boot. It was founded by two students that went to business school at Columbia University. They realized this, they went all in on it, and they just bootstrapped it from the ground up. This is another example of leveraging a blue ocean, noticing a gap in the market that hasn't been filled before, and also putting a lot of effort into the brand image and into creating amazing quality products. Like if you go to their website at Thursday Boots, you'll notice that literally everything is handcrafted. A lot of their products, like they only get 20 of them made or 100 of them made because they're literally all handcrafted and they just want it to be a really high quality brand. The 8th clothing brand is And1. If you remember back in the early 2000s, there was this clothing brand called And1 that was absolutely everywhere. They eventually got onto guys like Allen Iverson and these huge basketball players. But what they realized was that all these other big basketball brands were trying to sponsor all these big NBA athletes and trying to be like this really professional basketball brand. And one realized that there was this huge market in basketball for like street ballers, like the guys playing basketball downtown in New York City at like a street court, and realized that there was this whole other brand and this whole other vibe and feel that they could build inside of a basketball brand. If you have an hour, there's a really great documentary on this on Netflix called Untold: The Rise and Fall of And1. And basically what they leveraged in order to gain their success was hosting big events inside the street baller community. So while all these other brands were trying to get onto these NBA players and do everything in the NBA, they were going to all these different events and hosting events inside of like these cities and filming it and making these And1 mixtapes and things like that that were just going viral, and it helped build their brand that way. The 9th clothing brand case study is a clothing brand called World Industries. It's a skateboarding brand that was absolutely massive in the early 2000s. And the founder brought on Rodney Mullen and Mike Vallely, who are these two absolutely huge skateboarding guys from the early 2000s. And this is another great example of the yo-yo effect. Like I literally remember being on the street with my friends as a kid in the skateboarding world, and we've all got our skateboards and we're all dressed like skaters, and one of them had the World Industries t-shirt on and a World Industries skateboard, and I just thought it was so cool that I had to get it myself. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but when you're a kid, that's kind of like how it works. You like look up to one of those kids that you think is really cool, you see them with the World Industries thing, and you're like, I gotta have that, I gotta buy it. And this is just another great example to hammer the point in on how so many clothing brands that become successful is simply just because they got in with the cool crowd. They leverage something known as alpha customers. Alpha customers are your customers that already have a high status within the niche that you're trying to sell to. And if you get your clothing brand worn by those people, it's absolutely crazy what can snowball and what can come out of it. And just to go completely different here for the 10th and final case study, Holstrength. Holstrength is a Christian clothing brand, and I'm not particularly religious myself, but they're an absolutely amazing case study for how to become successful on social media. And what Justin did, the founder of Holstrength, is he basically was like extremely consistent on TikTok, extremely consistent on Instagram, built both of his social media accounts up to over 1 million followers within the first like year or two, and did over $1 million in sales in his first 16 months. And what he leveraged was just the sheer power of consistency, being disciplined, and the compound effect. And then also a niche where people like to really strongly identify with their religious beliefs and what they believe in. And so this is just an example of where the brand concept is really good for a niche. If you're being really consistent with it, and if you're creating content that's really connecting with them, it will absolutely crush. I hope that this video kind of gave you a glimpse behind the curtain into what made some of these different clothing brands successful, what they leveraged in order to gain that success, and hopefully you can learn a thing or two when it comes to your own brand about how to pull this off for your own brand. If you're thinking about starting up a clothing brand or you're already running one, you've got to check out the Apparel Success Mastermind. It's a monthly subscription where we do exclusive live streams. You get access to all of my courses. There's a huge community of other clothing brands in there helping each other and supporting each other. You can learn more at apparelsuccessmastermind.com, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.